Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week. I am delighted once again to have my co-host, Graham Brown. And Graham from Pickle is one of those stars who helps people get onto podcasts. He has his own agency, and he also hosts many podcasts. And so we've enjoyed it so much, these episodes we've done together. We're going to carry on with a few of our guests. And we're going to have a joint guest. We're looking forward to it. And this week, Graham, we're doing LQ, the last of the 8, before we summarize next month. Legacy and stewardship and leaving things better than you found them. What does it mean for you, Graham? And just tell us a bit about how you are at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I'll quote one of the authors that's come out a few times in previous episodes of these podcasts we've done together, Stephen Covey. He said, legacy, talking about it in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, recommended to anybody there as a leadership book. If you haven't read it, it's kind of a 101, isn't it? He said, live, laugh, leave a legacy. That was it. That was I think the summary to the 7 Habits. Pretty concisely put. Maybe it's too easy. What do you think, Jonathan? Do you think it should be that easy?
I do think people strive too hard to try and be something they're not, or get immortality with the naming of a bridge or some plaque, or
naming of a bridge. Is that
what little disc? Oh, I've been named after a bridge. But I think,
made it.
Yeah, that's
the Bowman-Perks suspension bridge.
That's right. No, I think mine'll probably be some toilet in a public convenience somewhere. The crapper.
Those wooden benches. You have. They're a bit sad when you read them, aren't they? They'll say like Rosie something or other.
Yeah.
Used to sit here and have her sandwiches for the last 32 years or whatever.
That's right.
And a little plaque on it.
Yeah,
it's not a legacy, isn't it? It's touching people, isn't it?
I like the ones where they've got a bench and it's a view over a valley or something quite beautiful. You can sit there and meditate and take in life.
Yeah, a bench.
Yeah, a bench.
Keep it simple.
Organizations talk about bench strength. This is about a strong bench. So legacy, which is our definition, leaving a legacy in your lifetime, stewardship, leaving your job better than you found it. It's particularly front of mind for me, as yesterday, Leigh, my wife, who's the CEO of the Inspiring Leadership Foundation, who's really calling in life is to help vulnerable girls get out of situations of abuse, trafficking, mental health issues, and give them a chance in life through mentoring and coaching, and finding people who will give them a leg up, a chance to get into a job, get out of serious organized crime or wherever they might be, or just their lives have really taken a downward spiral. And hearing the personal stories of the way she and her mentors and coaches have changed the lives of individual girls and an older woman as well, who turned their lives around. And that's a legacy, even if you make a difference to one. And the story of the starfish, which for listeners and for watchers, I'll just repeat the story, which has become quite a sort of well-used story, but I think it resonates for me. It somehow catches me emotionally. It means something. And it's that, I was recently on holiday with Leigh in Mauritius, and I imagine a sort of beach like that where we had Cyclone Freddy came, the biggest cyclone for 30 years, which caused us to be asked to stay in our rooms for 24 hours while the cyclone was whipping all the palm trees and tearing up beaches and things. But imagine that after the cyclone's passed, you're walking along one of these beaches and you see all these starfish washed up, miles and miles of sandy beach and starfish everywhere washed up, and they're drying out in the midday sun and they're dying. And you see this little old lady coming closer to you, and she's doing something. You're peering, can't quite tell out what she's doing. She's picking up these individual starfish and she's throwing them back in. And you meet her and you have a conversation. So what are you doing? She said, I'm saving the starfish. And you go, there's thousands of them. You're not going to make a difference. And she picks another one up and she goes, I made a difference to that one. And that for me is why we do the charity, the Inspiring Leadership Foundation, why we help other people, why I coach CEOs and leaders, why you and I are having these podcasts and these conversations, because I don't know, maybe loads of people are going to listen to this and this is crap. I'm not going to listen to these guys talk, yak on. But actually, I have had some lovely notes from people around the world who go, I always listen to your podcast. It really helps me. It gives me a lift up. And if I made a difference to that one person by the person I've interviewed and their experiences and stories, or you and I swapping stories that with tips and techniques that people apply to their lives and it enhances them, that's a legacy. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. You said earlier, Jonathan, about people they aspire to grand game changers, dents in the universe, etc., changing the world. But sometimes the best legacies are just, impacting one or two people in a very positive way, because that will then impact other people. There's a definite knock-on effect from that. Everybody can leave a legacy with the people around them, and especially like our families, the people, our loved ones around us. Those could be our legacies, right? The people that we help. You don't need to influence millions or billions of people. That's enough. I think if you live your life well and do it for other people in a positive way and positively impact somebody in a positive way, then that is a noble life lived. I don't think you have to kind of compare it to the celebrity, world-saving, stories that we're sort of the media carousel parades in front of us, right? Of these people who are doing these amazing things. Like, most people have good hearts and want to do something, so we can all aspire to that at least.
Yeah, and I think I've been listening to Wim Hof's book, the Wim Hof Method, and as I was telling you, going between the hot tub and the cold plunge pool, which I bought my cold pod, and every day I'm in there. And in fact, my wife surprised me, said, "I'm coming with you." And I go, "Really? You're going to do it too?" She goes, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." And sure enough, bold as brass, Leigh got into it for 2 minutes and sat there in the freezing cold water with the ice floating around at the top. Very impressed. But Wim Hof has made a huge difference in what he's done to encourage people to get over ailments and inflammation, things like that. It can become a bit cult-like, and he is completely barking mad. But aside from that, he has changed the lives of people. But I'm also drawn to the point you make that we don't have to do anything particularly special, but the journey is within first. There's that story, and I think it's written around a stone sarcophagus coffin in Westminster Cathedral of a bishop. Forgive me, I don't know the bishop's name, but he said this. He said, "When I was a young man, I thought I could change the world. But as I got older, I realized that perhaps I might try and change my country first, and then I could change other things and then the world. And as I got older still, I realized, well, maybe perhaps I'll just change my town. I can do that first. And then as I got older still, I thought perhaps I'll just change the friends around me. And here, as I come to the end of my life, I realized that if I changed myself first, improved myself, then that would influence others around me who would see my example, and they may change, which might change my town, my country, and who knows, change the world." And that really resonates with me. This journey that I'm on, as we're saying, next week will be on the 28th of March, my 61st birthday. And having had moments in life where you thought, oh, this might be the end, but no, it's not. I've been given another path, a little bit longer, an extension of time. That you realize that even like Marcus Aurelius, until the end of his life, he was still learning and growing and going to classes on Stoicism and self-improvement. And I think I'm going to be one of those guys. People might think me a bit nutty, but I'm pretty certain you are, Graham, because you're constantly looking to push yourself, grow yourself, and learn. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what it's about, isn't it? I think it was Gandhi said, live like you were going to die tomorrow, but learn like you were going to live forever. Something like that. And I apologize to if Gandhi and all the fans out there if I've hacked that quote. Something along those lines. But I mean, he was the one that said, "My life is my message," which I think is probably, for me, one of the most powerful quotes about legacy. I think he was asked by a journalist what was his message. It was maybe a British journalist at the time, and he just said that. To me, that's powerful. You don't have to have a why. You don't have to have a manifesto. You just live your life well and positively and with a good heart. Of course, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to offend people and piss people off and annoy people and do wrong things. But that's part of being human. You can forgive and forgive yourself as well. So maybe the legacy conversation, Jonathan, needs to be about, not the grand legacies, but, what can we all do, within our capabilities, that doesn't require access or doesn't require power or doesn't require influence or money. We can all do good things with an open heart.
No, I really love that idea. And I think it's just empowering ourselves to actually do what we can do where we are with what we have. I don't know where that sort of comes from, but I certainly love that quote that my life is my message from Gandhi. That really resonates for me. And I think that my late father, and as you know, his picture's up there on the back, and his naval hat and his sword are up there. But his life was his message. It just happened to be 33 years. He lived his whole life. It just was only 33 years long. He hoped it was going to be longer, but he and the other Navy pilots trying to land a huge, heavy metal aircraft carrier on a ship that's pitching and tossing at the Atlantic, trying to land on the size of a small tennis court, was a hell of a challenge. I was watching one of those silly TikTok clips of somebody trying to land a small plane on the little helicopter landing zone on the top of the Burj Khalifa or Burj Al Arab, I think it was, in Dubai, and how he had to strip it down and all this kind of stuff. And he practiced it on a runway, just landing in this zone. And many times he kept going over the edge. But then he eventually did do it after 2 or 3 false passes, and was so excited. And then afterwards could just nip off the end, just plunge straight down with smoke billowing out from the back in different colors. It was a pretty cool clip. But I mean, it's a bit of that's something that he's done, which is unusual. But some people can claim world records for eating the most hamburgers. I don't think that's a bit of a legacy. I just think that's gluttony. But let's go on to questions that came from the audience.
Let's do it.
CEO in Israel, LQ, he said, how do you focus on making a real difference in your work and life? What's your thoughts, Graham? How would you respond?
That's an interesting question. So the question is, why do you want to make a difference?
Yeah. Or how do you focus on it? Yeah. Why? What's the point of it?
If you want to make a difference just to feel that you're doing something of value, then that's fine. But then is being different of value? I think that's important, isn't it? That we all talk about being different, thinking different. The famous Apple and Steve Jobs sort of moniker. Is that actually the key to legacy, or doing something amazing? I guess that, the point is you actually have to do. I mean, if you want to stand out, you've got to do something different. You've got to be different, think different. Well, I think we've talked a bit about this before, haven't we, Jonathan? Like, that the challenge really isn't doing it. It's what stops you doing it. If that makes sense? Because we all have a natural equilibrium, which is that, or a flow state, which we will gravitate towards if we remove the obstructions and the work that gets in the way of that. And a part of that is actually the fear of the opinions of other people. And I see, if you look around at successful people, we've talked about leaders and we've talked about successful people who've left legacies. What's really interesting about vast majority of them is they were slightly socially dysfunctional, which is really interesting because, if you look at people who've done amazing things, it's, very common in business. If you think about, for example, entrepreneurs like, the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobs and etc., they're all a bit odd, which is interesting because they are naturally doing different things because they don't care about what other people think of them. So that sort of brings us full circle to the question, is that, we all can do different and be amazing and do these things of change, but it's not a case of, I need more motivation or more resources or more information. It's about what's the barrier that stops me doing that. And it comes back to, worrying about the expectations of other people. And I think that's it. Because what successful people do is that they just don't care. And, you know, the people who don't do anything in life care too much about what other people think of them, which is a strange sort of corollary of, you know, the whole idea of, you know, self-identity and success, isn't it? It's like, that's the challenge, is that you've actually got to be slightly strange and wired differently. I don't know if that's kind of I'd like to see the data on it, Jonathan, but if you look at some of the leaders that we've got in our list, you know, if you look down their sort of personality types, they're not all, they're slightly out on the spectrum, aren't they, really?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I think that's so true, that there's like, if you worry too much what others think about you, you'd be surprised how little they do. They're not thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. And we do spend, and I know I have over my life, this wish to be liked or popular, or, you know, you're not in the cool gang, but you wanted to be in the cool gang in the playground. But I think I was one of those ones who was a bit different, either dysfunctional or dyslexic, or just a bit odd. And I think to many of the successful leaders that I've had on the podcast or coached, and I think in some ways, the ones who are most happy, balanced, and have a normal childhood, and everything is just pretty easy, and not concerned about too much, just easygoing, they never really have achieved what people think is greatness. But the ones who are massively dysfunctional, have a father who was a narcissist or suffered abuse or whatever it might be, or just a very unusual dysfunctional life, are striving, like I was, to prove to a long dead father that I was good enough, or to prove to a teacher who said I was thick that I was good enough. So I wanted to become a visiting professor at a business school, and all this kind of stuff to prove to others who really don't care. I remember
the phantoms in your head. These are phantom conversations, aren't they?
Yeah. My mother said to me when I'd written a book about my time working for Field Marshal the Lord Inge, she was a very difficult man to work for. He'd fired the previous 2 ADCs, and I was his third one. The only reason he kept me on is they went, Peter, look, you can't get rid of 3 in a best part of a year. You're going to have to keep hold of this one. And he goes, but he's useless. Oh yeah, well, look, just somehow let him finish his year off. But I wrote a book, a private notebook of all my grievances and all my little chunterings that I had about working for this white collar psychopath. And my mother read it and she went, yes, darling, very interesting. Now burn it. Because he doesn't know anything about your grievances, nor is he interested in you. You don't even feature in his life. He's moved on. And so, but it's eating you.
Yeah.
Like the things eat us for a long time in our legacy.
They never go away, do they? I mean, you work through, the deep work is there. We've talked about that Hoffman method, you know, and this is the fire, isn't it? That is set in you since an early age. And we're talking about legacy today. And there's almost like in your own lifetime, there is a legacy, isn't there? Like your parents shape you, or they have a huge influence in you. And a lot of that is to do with their love or lack of love or abandonment, all these issues that we all deal with. Those then become fire inside of us, which either burns us or makes us. You know, you're either forged in that fire or you're burnt to a crisp. Wow, and you can see that, can't you? You know, like that sort of form. It really then depends, like your teenage years. And, you know, you talked about Leigh and the work that she does, is that in those teenage years, you can see how somebody with that fire can go either way in their formative years. They can either be nurtured, you know, you see a great example is, you know, like Mike Tyson and Costamado, you know, like here's a guy who grew up on the streets and it was just I think his mom was a prostitute, a junkie and a drug dealer, and his dad just kind of, you know, ran away, you know, and he was just a street thug. And then he got taken in by this father figure, this trainer, Costamado, and he turned him into, you know, an Olympic champion. So that could have gone the other way. He could come just like, you know, another gang kid who's just going to, you know, get shot, live like a street rat, right? I mean, I know his story isn't great long term, but he turns it around. But that's the point, isn't it? That's the legacy part. We all kind of live out these almost like echoes, and you see that, don't they? Like we've talked about our fathers, for example, the influence they've had on our lives. And I think acknowledging that is part of the legacy, isn't it? Acknowledging the good and the bad, forgiving it, and realizing how that has affected us, and how that still continues to affect us, right? And how also that will affect our children, and it's been well documented, those who have issues, and we've all had issues with their sort of fathers, and especially men with their fathers in their early lives, those issues manifest as echoes throughout our relationships with other male friends throughout life, and that especially work, status, and friendships as well. So these are the echoes of legacy, I think, beyond work and society. This is sort of the very personal stuff that I think a lot of people don't admit affects us.
Very, very powerful. And two thoughts come from that. One is this this idea about the legacy and the generations. And they're thinking now that in our DNA, the trauma can pass down, so that the trauma of generations from the Nazi Holocaust passed down generations. And some of them have mental health issues which come from that time and what they had. And I think of, my grandfather, who was a soldier in the Honourable Artillery Company in the First World War, got smacked over his head by a German marlin spike, a big mallet, I think, which went through his helmet and knocked him unconscious. They thought he was dead. He was left in a shell hole in no man's land for about 2 days, and then came to, and slowly crawled back through the blood-sucking mud to get his way across the battlefield back in. But he was never right after that. He was suffering from PTSD and depression. They didn't know what it was in those days. But sort of that passed on down. My brother David suffered from deep depressive moments before he tragically died before his time, age 63, as you know. And I think what went on, it's very interesting what happened to your parents and their parents and their parents, and how it influenced you. And how can we break the patterns is why I did the Hoffman process, to look at patterns of behavior that we've mirrored or copied or done the opposite to someone, avoiding negative love, trying to get love from parents who may not be there either physically, or they're just not alive, or models that you have like a boarding school housemaster or the army or whatever it might be, and how you have to break with it, understand what went on, and that they did the best they could, and their legacy was passing on to you what they thought they knew, but it might not be the right thing for you. And I think the other thought I had was transference, this idea that we see in people, perhaps our father or someone like that. So either we're attracted to them, or we have to take a particular dislike of them, and it's nothing to do with them.
It's the avatar, isn't it?
It's all our shit. It's all our stuff. And that was one of the good things on the Hoffman process. I remember a couple of conversations people had either with me or I had with them about how I triggered in them some stuff which was not about me, but it reminded them of someone else who was a bit like me, and they either disliked me or warmed to me because of that. It's interesting. If you come across transference,
it's very deep, isn't it? You've talked about this generational trauma, and you talked about DNA. I mean, DNA effectively is a biological legacy, isn't it? It's carried in our, our very cells and our nature. And it's information that's passed. You can trace it all the way back to the original, the original sort of, they talk about those sort of identifiable figures, don't they? If you can trace like the chromosomes on the female line back thousands of generations, maybe hundreds of thousands, it's all contained. But there's also this psychological DNA, isn't there, that we are impacted by, and you mention it about acknowledging it, and then I think the key part of it is forgiving it, isn't it? It's like, with my father, like being very angry, and I'm sure those that listen have maybe felt this, is that, being angry with him for things which he was working through from his father. His father died when my dad was aged 5, I think. You know, my grandfather, my biological grandfather, was a farmer. He died of TB, which is like, you know, they called it the working man's disease, right? Because it's, you know, he was out on the farm drinking, you know, got an infection, and then, you know, I think he died quite young. So, you know, my dad lived through that, and that infected him, and then I experienced that trauma from somebody I've never met. You know, I never met my grandfather. So, you know, and I wonder what his legacy was, you know, from his parents. So that could affect the way that I treat my son. But, you know, I think I've consciously at some point in my life decided to, not through the Hoffman method, but similar, you know, that sort of deep work, acknowledging it, and then coming to that forgiveness, isn't it? They call it in the movies atonement.
Yeah.
You know, it's a religious significance as well. You know, the at one. That's what it literally means, doesn't it? You know, and you look at any movie like Star Wars, where it's Luke atones with his dad, you know, Darth Vader. That peace, isn't it? It's just a biblical scene, isn't it? So I think even though I atoned with my dad when he was passed away, but mentally had gone through those conversations, that's legacy. Because then you can, only when you break that, acknowledge it first, forgive it, and then break it, rewrite those patterns, can you pass on something positive to the next generation.
It's spot on. And Bob Hoffman saw it as a sort of cycle of, firstly, awareness. Until you're aware, you're never going to be able to deal with it. So there's awareness of the legacy of your parents and your grandparents, and how they were when they were children, almost imagining yourself age 5, meeting with your dad age 5, sitting with your feet dabbling in a stream or something, chatting to him. 2 5-year-olds, you know, understand what life was like for him. To understand why he did what he did, and have compassion for yourself and compassion for him, and then have exercises to break patterns, neural pathways, and have choosing to make new synaptic connections, which get myelinated, and then those become the new pathways because they're super fast and more like super fast broadband compared to the old connection. And this is now the faster route that you have passing through. I think it's a whole fascinating area, this idea, atonement, compassion, and not being kept prisoner by your past and your legacy and your father's story and your grandfather's story, grandmother and mother's story, or other people who were, you know, primary caregivers for you, like my grandmother, because, you know, she and my mother were probably looking after me, or housemaster at school. Isn't this fascinating? Gosh, there's so much we can talk about. Let's pick the next one was the CMO. That
was a great question, by the way.
Oh, got us going, didn't it?
Your listener, yeah, absolutely, great, love it.
Great question. And he was asking LQ, what's more important, adding value in the short term versus adding value in the long term? You know, his point when he was talking with me is that, you know, Simon Sinek did this one, didn't he? This infinite and finite concept of that actually we're measured and we're rewarded for short-term results, but actually maybe the things that leave the longest legacy are sustainable change over the long term. What's your thoughts on this? What's more important, adding value in the short term versus the long term?
Yeah, well, you need to do both, because let's say we put this in the context of a business leader. You need the short-term wins to buy your time to be able to, you know, justify the long-term, you know, projects. It's very difficult to have everybody set on the long-term goals when you're not winning in the short term, because people are less, you know, long-term focused than, you know, leaders generally are. I mean, that's the point of being a leader. You should be focused on those big wins, big long-term goals. I read Jeff Bezos from Amazon. Apparently he has this 10,000 year clock, which I just find fascinating, the idea. And, you know, you can imagine this 10,000 year clock, which ticks, you know, one full like cycle of the clock face is 10,000 years. So you can imagine the time that he's had it, it's probably only done like, I don't know, I can't calculate it on the fly, but a few minutes, right? But that's the whole point, is that it was there to remind him about those long-term horizons how important that is. I remember going way back in the early days of Amazon. Everybody was saying Amazon, 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 not making any money. How can this thing can ever become, possible? For years and years, he was just reinvesting all the dividends back into the company, and reinvesting the profits, not distributing any dividends to shareholders. And then suddenly overnight he became the richest man in the world. Now that's purely in the context of business, but the story applies to everything, doesn't it? That it sometimes you only see that tip of the iceberg, that you only see when that sort of long game hidden. It's what they call the long hard road to overnight success. That is the result of long-term planning. Somebody's put in. So to answer that question, I would say you've got to be set on the long-term goals, but you've got to be conscious of batting for the side and winning the short-term ones as well. I've covered both my bases there. I really haven't answered the question, but I think, long-term studies have proven it though, haven't they, Jonathan? Those who commit to long-term goals and visions generally end up more successful over that long term.
Yeah, I think there's this bit like the book Essentialism that we've mentioned before, this idea of the two circles of one like little hedgehog with small arrows coming out in all directions from all sides, or the other one, which is just one massive arrow going up the page. That's the only thing, single arrow from the circle. That this idea that you can waste your time and energy on lots of small things, or you could go for a big, hairy, audacious goal, a BHAG, and do that. And I'm drawn by this idea of the 10,000 year clock, and comparing it to the 4,000 weeks of that book. Yeah. 4,000 weeks, where in my case I've got, if I was to live to 80, and I hope I do live way beyond that, to 100, 120, who knows, if longevity is to be believed as the research by Dr. Mark Hyman's having it. He wants to make it to 120. But the point is, I've only got 1,000 weeks left. And I just had a couple recently, and I went, oh, right, okay. So I've got less than that, 998 weeks. And it really makes you think about, it's that for those who are listening, I've got one hand just in front of my eyes and the other hand with my arm fully extended. And you have to move between both of these and think about the short term right up against your face and the long term way out there in the distance, and change your perspective of them both. As you say, you have to live to be present in this moment and this moment and this moment, at the same time as thinking, how would I like to leave things for my children and my grandchildren, and making a difference in the lives of the CEOs and the teams that I influence. It is a good balance. What about if I was just picking up as we look through the definition of it, but making it a sustainable difference based on your personal contribution, and asking yourself these three questions: am I leading a life of survival, a life of success, or a life of significance? So survival is the bottom of the pyramid. Success is what people think they want, but is it actually a life of significance? And this doesn't have to be world famous, but just you are significant in somebody else's life, that you've helped, you made a difference for that one, the sort of starfish approach. What thoughts come to mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of us find ourselves caught up in survival, don't we? That's the reality. It's hard to think outside of that when you're in that fight or flight mode. Anybody that started a new business will have understood and felt survival mode. What the reality of that is, that never having any kind of security in a business until quite well into your sort of business career. So everybody's experienced that, and when you're in that, it's very hard to think about success and significance, especially significance, because you're really just thinking about making bank at the end of the month. And imagine that is just the nature of survival, isn't it? You can't think long term. So I think everybody would want to be and make a significant impact on those around them in a positive way. But the problem is that, when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you're fighting for survival, it's very difficult to think those thoughts, right? And, we've talked about it, like being tired and having the inner demons. You and I have both traveled in our times, and, you've rocked up with your partner to a place in the world, going to some, you go on these crazy sort of weekends away, like a day trip somewhere in Europe, and you get there and you're tired and you're like hungry, looking for a place to eat. And it's like, what about this place? And it's closed. And okay, next one. What about this place? And it's like, you could just feel that you're at the edge now. You're at flashpoint, like you and your wife. It's going to happen any minute now. If they turn us away and tell us that the next place is closed, that's survival mindset in the extreme. When you're thinking about that, you're not thinking about, oh, look, we've both gone away to this lovely city, Prague or Paris or Brussels, for a weekend together, to spend time together. You're not thinking about enjoying that time and being in the moment. So I think it goes back, Jonathan, to that idea, isn't it? What stops us as opposed to how can we do that? It's because I think what stops us being successful and making significance is being stuck in survival mode. So that's the key, isn't it? It's like, okay, understanding it, accepting it, and then thinking about what can I do to get out of this? Because when you're fighting survival, you can't think about long term, can you?
Well, this is comes to mind in the news as we're recording this. We've got Credit Suisse has bombed as an organization, and it's been acquired for a couple of billion by UBS, the other Swiss investment bank. But there are those who say, well, they've gone from a business in success to one in survival to one that's crashed, and perhaps it is because some of the people in there were taking actions and doing things which were just based on short-term success for them to get their Ferrari, but actually not in that organization necessarily, though maybe I'm sure there were people there. I found too often in investment banking that people are interested in their own success, their own wealth, but actually not significance for the whole organization. It's just what they can get out of it for themselves. And that's when it all unwinds, and that greed takes over and organizations lose trust and lose credibility, and people pull the plug. I don't know, any thoughts you have?
Yeah. I mean, what's the significance that those organizations are making? I mean, they're sort of a necessary evil, but they're even just the products that they deal with don't really exist. They're manufactured products, right? When they think about the kind of derivatives and the investment, the investment funds that they run, or those things aren't real. Like what does it do? How does it affect? How is that significant? How is that improving our lives around us, right? So again, like you can build organizations that thrive financially on greed.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily like monetary and financial success is a moniker of actually significance. They seem to be like polar opposites. That maybe it's going down to that micro level in the individual and saying, okay, how are you helping people? Like just being a good person. I know that sounds really trite, but it's like sometimes that is probably the best thing you can do, as opposed to build something and make a lot of money and then change these people's lives. As they say, the road to hell is paved with good intention. I'm sure a lot of people go into these organizations thinking they're going to make a difference, but ultimately what happens over time is the DNA takes over, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I do think it's back to the moral quotient and that the values and the principles, what you will do and what you won't do. And some of the people I know, I had one former partner in McKinsey, and I were talking, and he said it was a great organization, but he said it's produced 3 or 4 newsworthy characters who were just got greedy in the extreme and did completely unethical things, and that their whole career had been in McKinsey, but they got so focused on their greed and their success that they did things which shamed the original founding fathers, and the whole ethos behind it, where integrity was everything. And I think it's very easy to lose your way in the mist. I've been listening to General Sir Cedric Delves's book, Across an Angry Sea, about D Squadron of 22 SAS. And there were times when the helicopters with the Royal Navy, the Fleet Air on my father's organization, were flying almost blind on the Grytviken Glacier, and eventually they crashed on it because they lost all horizon, and there was a storm going on, and there was a whiteout. And luckily, both helicopters, all the crew and all the SAS guys somehow survived. Remarkable, and they were rescued in better weather. But there's times when you lose all vision, all horizon, all sense of what is appropriate. And I think that analogy is quite relevant for what must have been happening in places like Credit Suisse with certain individuals doing things which were good for them, but they'd lost the horizon, which was what was right for Credit Suisse and for their investors. And as a result, the problems snowballed and it got worse and worse, which led to the untimely crash. And there's a bit of a panic going on about banking, and a bit like another banking crisis coming, and what will be next.
No surprise.
With the bank in Silicon Valley Bank, and the loss of credibility there. People do interesting things. Let's go to have a look at our characters that we wondered about. You had Robert F. Kennedy with his legacy, Martin Luther King with his legacy, Greta Thunberg, her legacy now, Honda, Rosa Parks, Bill Gates, Tim Cook, Steve Jobs. What thoughts come with those individuals about their legacy?
Martin Luther King's an interesting one because obviously he was assassinated and a controversial figure at the time. If you think of the civil rights movement in the 60s, and he, obviously he's been celebrated in later life, but post-life, he sort of, at the time in the 60s, he wasn't as seen as the iconic change maker that he is today. Of course, he had a huge impact, but was very much distrusted by the media. And so it's interesting, like if you look at, I think Gallup ran a survey in the 60s, and Martin Luther King, when they asked at the time, of all these change makers, leaders in society, who has had the most legacy, Martin Luther King was way down, not even in the top 20. So he didn't even feature at the time when he was active, and his politics and his voice and his message were out there, and the need was the biggest. But in the turn of the century, in 1999, they ran that survey again, and they asked Americans which American has had the biggest impact on the 20th century. And you think about all the different choices that you have. Even the Kennedys, for example. Martin Luther King came out number one. So I find that fascinating, good 35 years after his death. So that idea of legacy is that at the time, it's very difficult to understand sometimes that the message somebody is teaching us, because maybe we're not ready for it. Maybe society's not ready. As they say, leadership's not a popularity contest, is it? Leadership is about taking the path of most resistance. And that's why sometimes, the leaders who have the biggest impact at the time are very unpopular, because they have to say, look, you can't continue doing what you're doing this way. This ain't going to work. I've got to take you out, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to be uncomfortable, but you're going to hate me for this. But maybe when I'm gone, you're going to thank me for it, right? And we can see that when you talk about legacy, that's the Martin Luther King story. So I think we have to think about that in the context of our legacies, is that maybe the stuff that we do and how we have a positive impact on people might not be popular, because you may be challenging people and taking them out of their comfort zone. And that is particularly the case, I guess, when you're dealing with institutions. And this is more your bag, Jonathan, organizations. Have that kind of DNA and structure and resistance to change.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting point you make about popularity, and we've got into the 3 Ps of populism, post-truth, and polarization of the likes of Boris and Trump and Bolsonaro. And
are you going to get him in? Boris.
couldn't get Boris, couldn't leave Boris out. But it's interesting. Will people do the right thing? I mean, for example, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but in the UK, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he's making politics boring again. Thank God. Because because we had Liz Truss completely making it a joke, a sort of comedian on stage, with her Chancellor and Boris before that. And now we're trying to get back. And I think the Labour government will be the next one with a sort of steady Prime Minister. And that's actually sometimes what we want. It's not terribly exciting.
An operator.
Yeah, it's not exciting, but they're looking after it and the legacy they're leaving, rather than short-term win for their friends and like with Boris and his parties and mates of mates who were getting money from contracts with the NHS during the pandemic, so making money from people's deaths and stuff like that. You know, that's short-term. They're making themselves, enriching themselves and their friends, but it's not good for the country long term. And so sometimes, as you say, your legacy is a sustainable difference that you make, which does not make you popular at the time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in mine, Queen Elizabeth II, I think she's left an amazing legacy, both in her lifetime and afterwards. And I'm yet to see quite what Harry and Meghan's legacy is, having read their book, his book Spare. I'm just a little concerned that we're becoming too introspective, and this is not fair, and life's dealt me a terrible blow and things, rather than duty and service and taking some hard knocks for the good of the country. He could have gone one of two ways, because he had service in the military and various things like that, and did some great work with Help for Heroes and
Invictus.
the Invictus Games, great, and Princess Diana, both the things that she did for the Halo Trust, the anti-mining, and holding the hand of an AIDS victim, the small legacy things that change the way people think. And then you've got Florence Nightingale, who was working at a time when she was so lacking in respect from others, and her own family thought she was actually doing something which was worse than becoming a prostitute. She was going to become a nurse. Like, no, not our wealthy family. And she dithered and doubted whether she should do it after all. But at the time, she wasn't recognized for quite a long time. It's often, certainly with our own families, who never read our own books that we write or whatever like that. No, Dad, I haven't got around to reading your book yet. But it's actually quite a lovely special moment for me that both my daughters, Harriet and Bronnie, book or just started a book monthly coaching sessions with their dad, different from our normal chats. These are business coaching sessions where I'm able to use what I've learned to benefit my children. What else are we doing it for if we're not doing it for family? So I think that brings me back to my final point before passing over to you again, which is, I think family is a big part of legacy.
Yeah.
That when I die, if I brought up children to be kind and balanced and happily successful, in their own terms, not in my term of what I want success to be, but what success means for them, that I've been loving, I've been thoughtful, I've been supportive of my wife and my stepchildren and my grandchildren. That is success at the end of my life. It's not how many new contracts I'd won, or but also I think part of it is nice in what you do is we've touched the lives of people in a positive way through helping them, through supporting them, through challenging the way they are. That's for me a legacy and leaving a difference. What about you?
Absolutely. We've mentioned it before, but if you've missed the episode, there's a great book and a lot of articles written about it by, I think the book's name, it's often quoted under different names, is like The 5 Regrets of the Dying.
Yes.
By Bronnie Weir, who is a palliative nurse. It's really interesting. And I find that really fascinating because, there's a lot of talk of death in these podcasts, but not in a morbid sense. It's like Alan Watts, the philosopher, said, like, death is like the manure of life. Is that you need death to remind us like what life is about. Without, like, for example, you look at a rose, a flower, and it's beautiful, but it dies, and that's the reason why it's beautiful, because it's impermanent. It will soon be gone. And it's the same, like if you look at a plastic flower, it's just not the same because it will never die. The value of life is created by its impermanence, the fact that it will go away. And so therefore we need that death, and we need that understanding to remind us what this is about. And that's why when we're so caught up in the busyness of life that we don't think about this, is we're caught up with, paying the bills, or, getting the shopping, or, just trying to lose another kilo, or whatever it may be. That's the life, a reality for most people, that we don't think about. Actually, another day just ticks by, and okay, another day ticks, and bam, you're 50 or you're 60, right? Where did all that go? And so that Bronnie Weir book is really interesting. I think it's Bronnie Weir. Apologies. She's because she talks to terminally ill patients. These are the only people who have that kind of clarity of what it's all about. Because when you're terminally ill, so if you're in a situation where you have months, maybe a year of life left, everything just falls away. The BS falls away. You don't get angry about things which you shouldn't get angry about. You don't get stressed about things that are meaningless, just totemic things in our life. So those are the people that really understand what it's all about. And it's really interesting when asked what their regrets were. I find that fascinating. For me, it's almost like a touchstone. It's like, if you look at the 5 regrets of the dying, for me, that's the 5, like that's your commandments for living, if you like. And I won't cite all 5, but the number one interesting regret, and it was universal: language, background, creed, or whatever. Number 1 was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard, which I just find fascinating. And then, I think number 2 was, I wish I had spent more time with people that I loved. And I get all the numbers wrong, but number 3 was something like, I wish I had kind of something to the degree of found my true voice, which was like express myself in the way that I wanted to express it. And these were like the most common regrets. And I just find that fascinating. I think it's a little bit sad, but it's also empowering. I don't know. What do you feel about it? Do you feel sad, or like in terms of a legacy, when you hear these people talking about their final days and talking about their lives lived? I mean, is it morbid or is it empowering? What do you think?
I find it deeply empowering. And when my late mother-in-law, Marguerite, was in the oncology department, she died of a mixture of anal cancer, heart disease, lung disease, and Alzheimer's. One of them was going to kill her first at 76. And it took me into the oncology department. I was sitting waiting for her with all the other patients, watching, I think it was one of the big international football games was going on. And I got talking about the regrets of the dying. I did it in a way that doesn't sound as tactless as I'm now doing. Yeah, how you guys doing? You all dying? What thoughts you got? But it was almost like, what advice would you give to people who I coach and I have on the podcast? And it was this thing about they were different ages, and they were all terminally ill. They were all going to die. They told me so. This was probably led to the conversation. And it was that close ones, loved ones, family, having the conversations with them, not when they've died, but before they've died. And that you strive so hard in a job to, one of them had Rolls Royces and things like that, but then he lost it all. He'd been an entrepreneur. And he said, we get caught up in the trappings, the bling, the stuff, the marketeers' dream they sell you about. You'll be happy when ... You have 5 Rolex watches, that you can only wear 1, but it's nice to have 5. And he said it's all a lie, and that actually to make the most of your health, to keep your health as long as you can, to have your health span match your lifespan, to spend time with family, to stop with a grandchild to pick up a flower and not rush them on and pull their hand, to watch my dog eating the leaves on the tree behind, little willows back there up to mischief.
Is that what it's doing?
Yeah, it's just thinking,
I wonder what
this
it's up
tree. Hello, willow. What are you doing? I think it puts everything into perspective. And you mentioned that book, the Five Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie, and the others I would add on inspiring leadership books in the legacy section would be How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton M. Christensen, which is really about the sort of what matters in your life and how are you going to make, as you get to the final days. I've had a number of calls where and particularly with David dying and Graham being stabbed in that terrible attack on his home. My final moments have been very front of mind for the last 2 or 3 years, as we've discussed a few times. But actually, it's just made me realize, if I died later today, have I lived a full life? And seeing Leigh get these beneficiaries in her charity, telling their story and how it touched everybody in the room and the difference it made, that makes it all worthwhile. And I feel that I've got lots more to do, but if I was to die, I've had a full life. I've screeched across the finish line, going, hell, what a ride, with the smell of burning rubber, having had a great time and done some crazy things. So How Will You Measure Life? Legacy by James Kerr, about the New Zealand rugby team and their culture and their legacy. Another one on death and dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which was You Can Change Your Life by Tim Lawrence, which is about legacy and the Hoffman process. And then The Daily Stoic, Ryan Holiday's 365 reflections and meditations on the year from those people we have. And I'll just share a little poem which I found quite relevant, and then maybe a final word or two from you, Graham, before we appreciate equality about each other's and wrap up next month with 8 elements and what the whole lot means, that the integrated inspired leadership. But this is by Matthew Arnold, the Victorian poet and a biographer of Marcus Aurelius, who wrote quite beautifully of the tragedy of a busy, adventurous life that was missing something. And the poem goes like this, just 4 lines. And see all sights from pole to pole, and glance and nod and bustle by, and never once possess our soul before we die. And I think I'll leave you with that.
That'll be eulogy. Yeah, nice.
What does your soul mean to you, Graham? That's a big area.
I don't know. Like I'm not a religious person anyway. I believe in, but I mean, I share a lot of the values of religion. I think there's universal truths, right? So when it comes to soul, I don't know. I mean, like, I when I hear poetry, I believe in the beauty of poetry. And I love the beauty, the architect. I mean, look at a church or a mosque or a temple, and I'm not religious, but I can enjoy the beauty of it and appreciate the beauty of humanity. And I hear that poem, and I like hear music, and to me, that soul that's what it's about. That sort of, there's a human yearning for that. I very much do enjoy poetry. I'm a fan of many poets, and I enjoy. As much as it doesn't appear to be my avatar, I do enjoy all different kinds of soulful music, like, for example, opera. I'm absolutely mad fan of opera, and I love it. And I love all of that sort of expression, that sort of vulnerability. So, and I think those touching moments that you sort of see, those vignettes of life summarized in 4 lines, to me, that's soul. It's like, it's a real... it's a tribute, really. If somebody can do that for you, write a eulogy, if you like, or a summary of somebody's life in such a poignant and perfect way, that's a great legacy, I feel. You don't have to have this sort of like grandstand version of it. So yeah, that to me is soul. I don't know. It's difficult to define, Jonathan, because it's not definable in many ways. What about you? How would you define it?
Well, there's a lovely one, not quite the definition of it, but it was I forgot where it came from, but the gods, the story goes that the gods decided that they really wanted to protect humans from finding their soul. And so they put it on the highest mountain, and the humans all climbed up to the highest mountain and they found it. And so that's no good. So we can't hide it there. They're going to find it. They'll discover it. And then they said, well, put it in the deepest ocean. And then, of course, the humans went diving and exploring with their submarines, and they found the soul down there. And they went, I know what we'll do. We'll put it inside them. They'll never discover it there. They'll never find it.
We knew that was coming. The setup was so obvious, Jonathan.
Yeah, exactly. So, Graham, let me end with appreciating equality about you, my friend. I truly value you as a human with humanity and experience and wisdom beyond your years. And I really love time with you. So thank you. That's my appreciation of you today.
Thank you, Jonathan. I do really appreciate that. And I appreciate you because I think I'll go all the way back to the beginning. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he said, what it's all about: live, laugh, leave a legacy. And I think this is what these conversations are about. I feel like we're living it. We're just enjoying having these conversations, deep conversations we don't normally have, right? Yeah, I can have those with you. You're very open and very forthright with your feelings and your experiences. And laugh, I think we enjoy our times, bit of banter, as you call it. But I think that's what it's about. And hopefully maybe some of your listeners laugh along as well. And leaving a legacy, those great questions from the audience. I love those questions. So, I appreciate the fact that you've set that up and, you've created that community and that network around you. So it's been a very enriching experience, and hopefully this is the beginning. There's more. There's more,
and there's more, and there's more. Well, look, Graham, thank you very much. And for those listening and watching, I'm going to leave in the show notes a link to the Inspiring Leadership Foundation. If you want to leave a legacy in your time, whether it be giving your time as a mentor, as a coach, or whether making a donation to help, only £180 per girl will make a huge difference to their lives in the courses and the work that we do, I would appreciate that. And you'd be, looking after that starfish, making a difference to that person in their lives. So thank you for joining us. It's great to have you on. And Graham, I look forward to our next session in a month's time. Thank you. Goodbye.